So ladies and gentlemen, my name is Chris Cariani, and this is my project on free trade. Now here's my agenda. For today we'll talk briefly about what is free trade. I'll give you guys a description and the features of free trade. Then we'll backtrack a little bit. I'll get into the history of free trade and the implementation and how it came about. Then I'll bring us up to date on the current economies of the free trade and its effect globally. And then I'll cover just the opposition and, or I should say the perceived opposition and negative effects that free trade could possibly bring about, and we'll have a quick discussion. Now, what is free trade? Free trade is defined as an international market policy where the government itself does not restrict any imports or exports. Basically, there aren't any impositions. These restrictions or constraints would include tariffs, duties, and quotas on the economy itself. It also enables a nation to focus on core competitive advantages. Now, these advantages kind of cover the resources and materials readily available to that nation and how they use these resources and materials to produce, the country's specialty items. They do this to maximize the economic output and try to foster this national economic growth. Now, here are some of the features of free trade. Now, free trade is basically a trade of goods without any taxes or barriers. This is also transferred into the trade of services. Free trade is also absent of any trade distorting policies. These policies include taxes, subsidies, regulations, and really any laws that would give an advantage to one side of the market over the other. Now, free trade is also unregulated, which basically means that anybody is allowed access to the market or market information thereof. And it also basically kind of nulls this inability of firms to create this government-imposed monopolies and oligopolies. And then from there, it allows companies to formulate trade agreements, which would hopefully encourage free trade. Now, throughout the times before free trade kind of came about, the U.S. was mainly focused on this idea of mercantilism, which was the economic theory during the 16th and 18th century, which basically promoted this idea of government regulation of the economy. As you can see, I've listed just a bunch of regulations that the government would normally go about. Some of these include monopolizing markets, forbidding trade, to be carried in foreign ships, limiting wages, restricting domestic consumption, which is far different from what we see today. Now, how does free trade really arise? Previously to the colonial America, the economy was regulated by this British mercantile system, which is what I had discussed previously. Now, the American Revolution came about, and from there, the British Parliament had issued Prohibition Act. And this prohibition basically blocked colonial ports, and free trade began to develop, basically as a result of these blockages. As time progressed, it had become more and more apparent that Democrats were favoring kind of moderate tariffs. They did this because they would hope that these tariffs would improve the government revenue, while on the other hand, we have Republicans favoring high protective tariffs with hopes that they would essentially protect these favored national markets or industries being kind of coming to power or being the most favorite at the time. Now I'm going to bring you guys up to date on the quick global economies that are going down. We basically have this thing called the Enabling Trade Index. It basically looks at policies and services of a nation that facilitate trade in goods across the border They measure the market access, border administration, both transport and communications infrastructure, and the actual business environment. They basically take all this into consideration when evaluating a country's overall free trade capabilities. I basically listed the top 5 indexes to date currently. We have Singapore at number 1, basically being the most free trade nation. And then we got number 5, we got Switzerland. I thought it was relatively surprising that the United States fell to the ranking of 19th with an index of 5.03. I kind of expected the US to be a little bit higher up, but I do understand that we have relatively complex subsidies and tariffs on imports and exports. Now, continuing from that, the free trade is currently being exemplified through like these 3 initiatives, which is, we all know the European Union, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and the World Trade Organization. Now, despite all of these initiatives, there still are protectionist policies included in these agreements because to date there really isn't one wholehearted free trade nation. There are bound to be taxes and tariffs implemented on any type of resource or national good. Now, coming from this, I took a kind of an opposition approach just to kind of see, to me it seems as if free trade would normally be a good thing, allowing a company or a nation to trade freely among other nations. But apparently there is a little bit of opposition. This includes political stability and whether the government itself can survive without having any, taxes to rely on. Again, this also goes into the overall national security, which covers on whether free trade really promotes the national economy as a whole rather than hurting it. And now I kind of took a quick economic standpoint where economics say that the fact that free trade is allowed will hurt existing markets because imported goods come in at a lower price. So, for example, if the national sugar market is at a specific at a specific price, and foreign sugar markets, provide their goods at a lower price, then for the fact of free trade, these imports will essentially bring down these domestic markets. So at the same time, these profits and markets are being shared. Aside from the economic standpoint, we see a lot of human rights and environmental abuses. Free trade really allows the nation itself to take advantage, or the corporation itself to take advantage of any outside sources, which has really led to environmental degradation. We've seen outsourcing, which has led to sweatshops, child laborers, and this idea that we are forcing a cultural change among other nations where we are going to either outsource our work or really kind of implementing this global corporation, if you will. Now, seeing both sides of the argument, what do you guys think? Would a world economy look worse or better than it does now if free trade were to be globalized? Now, comparing this, would you say that a completely protectionist ideology would make things better or worse? Like, who exactly would stand above? And thank you. These are my sources.